All I have for you is a word.
Tenet.
It's back! All hail Nolan! Cinema is back! The saviour of cinema! Who's made a film that will have you on the edge of your seat. Don't sit down though, he does not like chairs. Stand! Stand and applaud! The messiah of the multiplex, Christopher Nolan! I'm mostly joking about that one, but there's been a lot of furore and talk about this movie. It feels like we couldn't escape this movie over the last couple of months, whether it was the seemingly constant push in its release date, the questionable release strategy, and now it's finally here. So what do I think of Tenet? It's the most Christopher Nolan movie ever. For better and for worse. Nolan has always had some relatively complex ideas in his work, whether it was the planting of ideas in Inception or the concept of relative time in Interstellar. And here we also have an idea of inversion, which is the idea that objects can move backwards through time. Yet somehow it's overdeveloped and underexplained. Somehow. Compared to something like Inception. With Inception, there's a lot of exposition, and it just about works. But the other thing is that even though you're explaining to us why we need all these people for dreams, how the rules of this dream world work, and why they go into dreams, you can play around with it more because being in a dream, you don't have to cling to the laws of reality. Whereas in Tenet, it tries to be realistic and also tries to be scientific, and it kind of buckles under the weight of that. With Tenet, it feels like a lot of the movie is explaining that idea of inversion, but it really feels like there's moments where something you've been told is contradicted later in the film. But in general, the film has a real problem with telling us rather than showing us. And I know Nolan was very quick to say it's not time travel, it's inversion. I guess he figured it was too simple to use a concept like time travel or too common. But really it feels like it's a case of this is time travel. And in trying to explain the rules so much by setting up inversion, he's kind of hurt the movie here. It feels like he's just twisting and turning and making the idea more complex than it needs to be to show how clever it all is. The second problem is that even if you are paying attention and listening, the audio mix for the film is dreadful in my opinion. There's moments where environmental noise and the soundtrack are drowning out key dialogue, which means that the film is even more incomprehensible as a result. And this is really important stuff that helps us understand the movie. I mean, the soundtrack is good, but maybe you could have toned it down a bit. Because here we have a film that needs to be explained, but it first of all is more complex than it needs to be, and then they also drown out some of the key dialogue to make it even less accessible again. And I know now you're rushing down to the comments to go, oh, this idiot didn't get the film, it's so clever, this is why we can't have adult movies. Relax. The movie literally says at one point to not think about it, as if the whole thing is too difficult to comprehend. But the problem is, if you don't think about it at all, the movie makes no sense, and if you overthink it, you start to see the flaw of the film. It's like that kid in maths class who just didn't show his workings and wrote down the answer. Hey, that's great when you get the answer right, but when you don't have the answer right, it's hard to tell where it all went tits up. It feels like they're trying to hide how shallow and standard the actual plot is. I mean, the story is so basic it could be just the James Bond or Mission Impossible plot. The bad guys hidden the bomb, our heroes have to find it. And then they throw the whole concept of time manipulation over it to hide how mundane it actually is. And then they twist it and turn it so many times to show the film is kind of clever and hide that weakness. But really, it doesn't benefit the film anyway, it just hurts the film's pacing. The film has moments where it's firing on all cylinders and you're really excited and it's going really well. And then it grinds to a halt for way more exposition. And it stops and starts so many times that coming into the last act I'd lost any faith that the movie could win me back. What disappointed me more was that I could overlook the plot and concept problems if the rest of the things were good, but they're not really. The characters in the film are just so dull. John David Washington does show moments where he's incredibly charismatic and entertaining, but he's also really restrained by pretty subpar writing, and the character just doesn't have anything we can really connect to or be interested in. He does have a kind of a suave coolness to him, but the writing holds him back, and as a result he gives a very casual performance as the protagonist, who's called the protagonist. Robert Pattinson is very entertaining when he's on screen, and he does have a good chemistry with John David Washington, but overall it just feels like they don't have a lot to work with, and it feels like these two actors were basically squandered. Then we have Elizabeth Debicki, who is a really good actress, but has nothing really of any consequence or interest to do. I mean, Nolan has often come under criticism for his writing of female characters. They're generally just there to drive the motivation for our male characters, or
push the story forward without having anything of real interest to do here. And that's obviously the case here because she's the emotional hook, or should be. She's the only one with a real personal stake in this, how this story plays out and this film in general. But she's mostly left out of the core narrative altogether, to the point that there's not a lot of development there for her, and she's almost forgotten completely by the end. It's really, it feels like a waste. Kenneth Branagh is there too, with a ludicrous Russian accent. I don't think he had the menace that this part needed, but he was fine, I guess. The actors do their best, but none of them are helped by the dialogue, which, when it isn't spouting exposition, is just awfully clunky. There's a moment where they're really building up the threat and the stakes of their mission. And someone goes, "It'll be the end of the world as we know it. Everyone's going to die." To which Elizabeth Debicki's character says, "Including my son?" Yes. Yes, the whole world. He's part of the world. Yeah, we were including him. Thanks for that. I nearly burst out laughing when I heard that line. It was so ridiculous. We also have a line where our villain says, "If I can't have you, no one can." Oh, did you steal that line from 50 Shades of Grey, Nolan? Hey, look, a lot of the problems I mentioned are on paper. Maybe some of the technical stuff can save the movie, right? I was shocked at how unremarkable the cinematography for this movie was. It was just so bland looking, which is weird because Hoyt van Hoytema, the cinematographer for this movie, has done excellent work in the past, but here it just looked so dull. I mean, visually the film does have some flourishes. I mean, this is Nolan, so don't expect any CGI. But the scale and the practical effects of some of the big set pieces certainly will astonish. It's in some of those high concept action scenes that the movie really clicks. To be honest though, I found some of the smaller action scenes to be better than the big scale ones. We have the big plane scene that we keep seeing, which was good. I just feel that it wasn't showcased incredibly well to show off the scale. I feel like they could have done it a little bit better. It was a little bit underwhelming. But on the other hand, I really enjoyed scenes with our characters breaking into buildings that had just a real kind of slick coolness to them. We had the physical fight scenes, which were honestly above some of Nolan's previous movies, maybe even above some of the fight scenes in the Batman films. And then we had the highway chase scene, which I just thought was incredibly impressive, had a real intensity and practicality to it, and also had great ramifications in the scene that followed it as well. I just felt like that was one of the highlights of the film as a whole. I don't think all the big action scenes land. We have the opening, which I thought was a bit underwhelming. It just felt like something Nolan had done before, but a lesser version of it. It kind of reminded me of The Dark Knight Rises. I'm sure there's other connections as well. The film in general has a lot of moments where it feels like Nolan has done something similar to this before, but better. I just found it a little bit underwhelming, and as a result it wasn't entirely captivating, and the problem is that after that opening things get quite slow for a while, so it didn't really hook me straight away like I think they hoped it would. We have the big action set piece towards the end of the film as well, which I just felt was uninteresting. I don't think the threat was fully fleshed out, and as a result that undercut the stakes of the whole film in general. And it also just really felt like something from a lesser film. It didn't work for me at all. Nolan has often been accused of being a bit cold and emotionless in his films, and I think that's certainly a valid critique here as well. He does try at times. I just feel like I didn't have any real emotional resonance with the story, and I didn't find the characters interesting or developed enough to really invest in them. And when you have a film that's deliberately trying to be obtuse and you don't have a plot to latch onto or characters you find interesting, then you've got a problem. This is a movie I really wanted to love. It was my most anticipated film of the year before all this kicked off, and of course it's now the first kind of big film back in cinemas, and I've been a fan of all of Nolan's previous work. But here it really feels like he's just enamoured with his own cleverness. I've heard people say they have to get a second viewing to fully understand it, but at least for me personally, I feel like I wouldn't get anything more out of a second viewing except more boredom. As is, Tenet is an enigma in how it manages to be both half-baked and meticulous. It feels like putting together a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces, but you can see that the picture it makes isn't all that interesting. I mean, I'm glad cinema's back, but if the reviews for the film I'm going to review next are true, maybe it would have been better if it didn't come back. If only there was a way I could go back to before I bought that ticket. Wait, I could. Not time travel, that's stupid, but inversion. Yeah, now that sounds clever. There's no time to waste. Well, there's only time.